right? It's very important to realize that there are different audiences and different standards for your academic work and a journal article. An article by Hawkins et al. In the Journal of Academic Librarianship summed it up nicely. Dissertation committees assess whether a student's work has fulfilled program outcomes and requirements, not whether that work is ready for publication or even widespread release. Dissertation review certifies the student's capabilities within the context of the discipline and the institution where that work is conducted. Editors and reviewers of peer-reviewed journals are experts in their fields, and they are well-versed in scholarly communication. Their task is to assess whether papers and projects further the knowledge in those fields and thus should be published. Today we will offer 8 tips for converting your paper.
All right. I'm Cecily Betz, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Pediatric Nursing, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you and to sort of give you some insights about what to do when you've completed now your thesis, your dissertation, and you now want to submit it for publication to a professional journal. First of all, it's important to know that there are differences between your very hard work that you engaged in terms of putting your thesis together and submitting your work for publication. So first of all, and I just want to go through some of these differences here. A thesis, as you well know, you had to meet certain academic requirements. That's different from a journal article where the requirements of the journal are different. You're writing for a different audience. There's the reference style, and just the very sort of nuances associated with the format, as I mentioned before, the writing style. Your thesis, as you well know, was reviewed by members of your committee, whereas when you submit your article, your name is not revealed to the reviewers, nor do you know who the reviewers are. But you can rest assured that those reviewers are experts in their field. So they look at your paper with a critical eye to see if your paper meets the scholarly and scientific standards, not only of the journal, but your field of practice and your field of scholarship. A thesis is predicated on chapters. As you all know, you put different chapters together that were focused on different aspects of your study. In contrast, in an article, we talk about sections, we talk about an introduction, we talk about the results, we talk about the implications for practice, we talk about limitations. Those sections look a lot different than your chapters, and Dr. Cuevas will be reviewing some of that with you shortly. As you know, you put a lot of effort into your thesis. It was a lot of work, it was lengthy, there were probably no word limits. In contrast with articles, generally speaking, they have about a 5,000 word limit, but that will vary depending on the type of article you submit, as well as the journal requirements themselves. Your thesis contained a table of contents. We don't have table of contents in articles. We have what we call the manuscript format. In your thesis, you are required to do a lengthy research of literature. In journal articles, they vary, and I might say too, they vary by discipline. Some disciplines have very, very brief review of literature, whereas other disciplines have more lengthy review of literatures, but nevertheless, they look very different. They're far more succinct than your thesis. In terms of like IRB approval, you were likely required to describe that in great detail. In articles, typically an IRB statement is 1 to 3 sentences at most. In your thesis, you are required to give quite a bit of description and copies of the tools, measurements that you used, whereas in an article, we ask you to be very succinct and provide only the most essential information about your tools. For example, the reliability and validity of the tools, the psychometrics. In your thesis, you presented quite a bit of your results, your findings. And in an article, this is really dependent, and probably you'll want to consult with your thesis chairs or other professionals in terms of how should I present the findings of my study, of my thesis, of my dissertation. And you may be parsing some of that out and presenting your findings actually in more than just one journal. Again, that's something that you really have to sort of very carefully consider. And I would really recommend that you get assistance in that regard. One small point I'd like to make about a thesis, and that is your verb tenses vary. You may say in a chapter, I will be doing this. Very rarely would you use a future tense in an article unless possibly when you're talking about clinical implications. And again, you want to be consistent with verb tenses. I know these are very small points, but nevertheless, these are relevant points, and certainly reviewers will be picking that up and probably commenting to you about that. Dr. Cuevas, are there any other comments you wanted to add with this slide here?
I don't, but it does support a lot of the tips I'll be providing in just a few minutes.
Okay, fine. I guess you're doing tip number 1?
I am, yes, and thank you. So first and foremost, congratulations on making it at this point of your academic career. I'm going to be presenting 8 tips on what has helped me converting my dissertation into a manuscript for publication. Oftentimes, people think that choosing the right journal for your research can seem daunting, but it doesn't have to be. By asking some very simple questions, you can actually begin to narrow down your focus, and that is the beginning of how to convert your dissertation to a manuscript for publication. So first, you can begin by talking to your supervisors, colleagues, and friends and asking them for recommendations. You also go to your school's library to find out if there are particular journals that fit within the scope of your research. And you can also go through the journal and publishers' websites as well. It's very important to read the aims and scope of the journals that you will are thinking about submitting the manuscript to. The scope of journals is really just the journal's purpose or objective, and it's what the journal wants to accomplish by delivering that content. And that's very important to keep in mind when you're choosing the particular journal. So ask yourself this question: is my research relevant to the aims? Is the research relevant to the audience targeted by the journal? Does it accept my type of research? Some journals are much more accepting of clinical studies or qualitative papers or quantitative papers. So it's very important to begin looking to see what they actually accept in their particular journal. And also ask yourself this question: does your work fit with the other published papers? Often in the journal's websites, you will see that they have a recommended structure and reference style for the articles. And sometimes that would help you also decide whether this is the right journal for you. A typical structure would be a title page, abstract, key terms and keywords, main text as introduction, materials and methods, results, discussion, acknowledgments, declaration of interest and statement, references, appendices, tables, and figures. One thing that really helped me when I was converting my dissertation into a manuscript for publication is this really useful tool called Journal Author Name Estimator. It's also known as JANE. And here you could actually enter your abstract, and they'll give you some journal recommendations. And they have this particular tool where it relies heavily on PubMed, which contains also papers from a wide range of journals. They're also connected with Medline and Directory of Open Access Journals. And so that's another useful tool in order to narrow down your options. But I highly recommend that you ask your colleagues as well as your mentors to read over your abstract and provide some recommendations. There's also a few other key points to keep in mind in choosing the journal. Impact factor might be important for you, the site score, information for authors, journal metrics, journal announcements, and special issues. There might be sometimes that the journal have a particular issue, a special issue that has been announced, and it may fit perfectly with the kind of research work that you're doing. You can also keep in mind examples of articles previously published, and I highly emphasize this in particular because it will help in how to structure your manuscript. And also keep in mind the review process. Some may be lengthy, it might take 6 months, others may take 3 months. And oftentimes in the journal's website, they'll have some information of the review process.